If you think you know what betrayal looks like, you don't. Because the most devastating betrayal in this story doesn't happen in the dark. It doesn't happen in a whisper or a lie told behind closed doors. It happens in front of millions of people. Under studio lights so bright they bleach the skin white, with cameras rolling and the whole world watching. And the man who does it believes, with everything broken inside him, that he is doing it to save her life. This is the story of Adrian Vaylor and Alara Wynn, a billionaire who built his empire on control, a woman who dismantled it with the truth, and one public moment that was never what it appeared to be. If this story grips you, hit that like button right now. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because nothing in the next 2 hours is going to be what you expect. The studio was too cold. That was the first thing Alara noticed when she walked through the service entrance at 7:14 in the evening. Not the cameras, not the crew moving in careful, practiced arcs around the set, not the low industrial hum of equipment being calibrated for the 9 o'clock broadcast. The cold. It hit her the moment the door sealed behind her, the kind of institutional cold that came from air conditioning units running at maximum capacity to protect the equipment rather than the people inside it. She pulled her coat tighter and kept walking. Her heels on the concrete floor made no sound. She had taped the soles that morning with dense felt padding, the kind used in surveillance work, because she needed this entrance, this entire evening, to go unheard. She had 12 minutes before Marcus Hale did his second perimeter check. She needed 10. The red file was already on the jet. She had placed it there herself, 3 hours ago, in the document compartment beneath the left rear seat, sealed inside a fireproof envelope she'd purchased in cash from an office supply store 2 counties away from her apartment. The file contained 462 pages of financial records, internal communications, and time-stamped recordings, and if every other part of this night went wrong, if she was stopped, detained, separated from every plan she had built over the past 11 weeks, that file would survive without her. Nora Vale knew where it was. Nora knew what to do with it. What Alara had not told Nora was how much tonight was going to cost. She turned left at the second corridor junction and counted doors. The fourth one. She'd memorized the layout from a fire safety schematic she'd found embedded in a permit application filed 3 years ago when the building underwent partial renovation. The door had a push-bar handle and a magnetic lock that cycled on a timer she'd tracked across 6 separate site visits over the past month, always arriving as a freelance production consultant, always carrying a clipboard, always leaving before anyone thought to check her credentials against the actual client roster. The lock disengaged at 7:16. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was a secondary archive space, currently used for cable management and equipment storage. Shelving units lined both walls. In the center, a folding table held a laptop connected to the building's closed-circuit monitoring system through a maintenance port that the building's IT contractor had failed to close after last week's server update. Alara knew this because she was the one who had ensured it remained open. Not directly. She had passed the information to a technical contact through 3 layers of separation, and the contact had done the rest. She sat down, opened the laptop. The monitoring feed loaded in 9 separate windows, every public-facing camera in the studio complex. She located Adrian in the 3rd window. Green room, east wing. He was standing with his back to the camera, jacket on, hands in his pockets. Not moving, just standing. He did that when he was working through a calculation he couldn't solve, stood completely still and let his mind run. She watched him for 4 seconds, then made herself look away. She needed to focus. 40 minutes earlier, in the lobby of the Meridian Hotel 6 blocks from the studio, Adrian Vaylor had received a message on a burner phone that only 3 people in the world knew existed. The message came from a number he didn't recognize. It contained a photograph and 6 words. Deny her tonight, or she disappears. The photograph showed Alara. She was on the sidewalk outside their apartment building, the one they'd lived in together for 14 months under a lease held in a name that was supposed to be untraceable. She was carrying groceries. Her coat was the gray one she wore on Tuesdays. The image was crisp, professionally composed, the kind of image taken by someone using long lens equipment from a position of patience and preparation. It was not a warning shot. It was a demonstration. We have been watching her. We have been close to her. We can reach her anytime we choose. The second message came 90 seconds later from a different number but containing the same syntactic structure, the same punctuation habits. Someone who wasn't trying very hard to obscure that both messages came from the same source, or who wanted Adrian to believe the operation was large enough that multiple actors were in play. She is carrying your child. Do what we say. She lives. Do anything else. She becomes a liability we cannot afford. Adrian had read both messages standing in the elevator, alone, between the lobby and the 14th floor. By the time the doors opened, he had already done the math that felt like swallowing broken glass. He could not call his security team without alerting whoever had penetrated his inner circle. And someone had, clearly, or they wouldn't have the burner number. He could not warn Alara directly because her phone was almost certainly being monitored, and contacting her would signal that he'd received the threat, which might accelerate whatever timeline their enemy was operating on. He could not pull out of tonight's broadcast because canceling at this stage would trigger exactly the kind of legal and organizational review that would expose the inheritance clause before he had any chance to control the narrative around it. He had walked into his suite, stood at the window overlooking the city for 11 minutes, and then made the call that he would carry for the rest of his life. He would do what they asked. He would deny her publicly, on live television, in front of an audience of millions, and then he would spend every hour after that broadcast finding whoever had sent those messages and taking everything from them. What Adrian did not know, what he could not know because Alara had deliberately ensured he couldn't, was that she had been tracking Vivian Cross for 7 weeks before that photograph was ever taken. She had known the threat was coming. She had built her response around the certainty of it. And she had made the decision, alone, in the kitchen of their apartment at 2 a.m, 6 days before tonight, that the only way to protect Adrian from what was coming was to let their enemies believe they had already won. She had cried about it for exactly 1 hour. Then she had washed her face, opened her laptop, and gotten back to work. In the archive room, Alara pulled up the personnel feed for the East Wing corridor. Marcus Hale appeared at 7:21, moving at his standard pace, stopping at the door to the green room, exchanging 4 words with the exterior security post, then continuing north. She tracked him until he was out of frame, then redirected her attention to the main studio floor. The set was already prepared. 2 chairs, a glass table, a backdrop displaying a cityscape in shades of blue and gray. The interview format, Adrian's preferred format for public appearances requiring the performance of openness. He was good at it. He had a face that read as forthcoming even when it was concealing everything. She had loved that about him, once. She had also spent the last 4 months learning exactly how it could be weaponized. Vivian Cross appeared on the feed at 7:24. She came in through the main entrance, which meant she had credentials, real ones, building issued, not duplicated, which meant her access to this production had been established through legitimate channels. Alara had suspected this, but hadn't been able to confirm it until now. It changed the risk calculation slightly. Vivian wasn't improvising. She had embedded herself deeply enough into the production infrastructure to move openly. Alara watched her. Vivian was 51 years old with the kind of posture that had been trained into her rather than grown naturally, and a stillness about her face that had nothing to do with calm. She spoke briefly with the floor producer, checked something on a tablet she was carrying, and then moved toward the production room. Alara's stomach tightened. She closed the monitoring window and sat for a moment in the thin fluorescent light of the archive room, her hands flat on the table, her breathing slow and deliberate. The baby moved. A small, unmistakable shift in her lower abdomen, the kind of movement that still surprised her after 4 months, still sent a flutter of something through her chest that she didn't have a name for. Something that sat between terror and the most overwhelming love she had ever experienced. She put one hand against her stomach and pressed gently. "I know," she said quietly, to no one, to both of them. "I know." She stood up, straightened her coat, checked the secondary phone, the one that ran on a prepaid network purchased in another state, and confirmed that the message she'd scheduled was still queued for 9:47 p.m. Then she picked up the single document she'd brought with her, folded inside a plain manila envelope, and walked back out into the corridor. She had 8 minutes before the broadcast began. She used 6 of them. Adrian had been in front of cameras enough times that the pre-broadcast ritual had become automatic. Makeup, water, The specific way he arranged his jacket so that the lapel didn't catch the light at the wrong angle. He knew how to occupy a chair like he owned the room it was in, how to meet a camera lens with a gaze that read as directness rather than aggression. Tonight, none of it felt like anything. He sat in the green room and watched the wall and tried not to think about Alara in the apartment, moving around in that gray coat, not knowing. He tried not to think about the baby, their daughter, the ultrasound from 6 weeks ago had said, and he had sat in that clinic holding Alara's hand and felt something open up in his chest that he hadn't known was closed. He tried not to think about any of it because if he let himself feel it, he wouldn't be able to do what he'd already decided to do. Marcus knocked and entered at 7:56. 30 minutes, Marcus said. I know. Marcus stood in the doorway. He was 44 years old and had worked for Adrian for 9 years. And in that time, Adrian had trusted him with things he'd trusted no one else with. Security protocols, personal movement, the handful of private operations that had required absolute discretion. Marcus had never failed him, had never even come close. Adrian looked at him now and tried to read something in his face. Nothing. You got the perimeter check done? Adrian asked. Yes. Anything off? A pause. Half a second, maybe less. No, clean. Adrian nodded slowly. Go check the east corridor again. Another pause. The east? Again, Marcus. Marcus left. Adrian turned back to the wall. He didn't know if Marcus was compromised. He didn't know who he could trust in this building, which meant the only person he could operate with certainty around tonight was himself. He had spent 45 minutes in the hotel suite running through every variation of what could go wrong and had arrived at the same conclusion each time. There was no version of this night that didn't cost him something he couldn't afford to lose. He had chosen Alara's life over their marriage. He told himself it was the only choice a decent man could make. He did not yet understand that Alara had already made her own choice, independently, and that hers had been harder. The floor producer knocked at 8:02. Mr. Vaylor, we need you at the set. Adrian stood. He walked to the mirror on the back wall and looked at his face for 3 seconds. 43 years old. The son of a man who had built an empire on decisions made in rooms where the consequences were felt by people who never even knew his name. A man who had spent his entire adult life believing that control was the same thing as protection. He was about to stand in front of the entire world and destroy the best thing that had ever happened to him, because someone had told him it was the only way to keep her safe. He straightened his jacket. He walked out of the green room. The studio floor had a particular smell, a combination of electrical heat, industrial carpet, the faint chemical edge of makeup that had dried under bright lights through too many productions. Adrian had always found it clarifying, the way some people found clarity in cold water or physical exertion. Tonight it just felt thick. He moved to the chair on the right side of the glass table, sat, accepted a small microphone from the sound technician without making eye contact, and waited. The interviewer was a man named Garrett Cole, network veteran, 15 years of primetime experience, the kind of journalist who understood that the most revealing moments in an interview happen not in the questions but in the calculated pauses between answers. Adrian had been interviewed by him twice before. He respected the craft. He had also, in the past, been able to stay several steps ahead of it. Tonight he needed Garrett to ask the question he'd been briefed to ask. Whether Garrett knew he was being used was something Adrian had neither the time nor the capacity to investigate right now. We're live in 4 minutes, someone called from the darkness beyond the lights. Adrian looked at the camera, looked away, looked at the empty chair across from him where Garrett would sit. Somewhere in this building, Vivian Cross was waiting to see if he would do it. Somewhere outside this building, Alara was either safe or she wasn't, and he had no way of knowing which. He pressed both feet flat against the floor, an old discipline, grounding technique, his father had called it, and made himself breathe. In the monitor-mounted stage left, he caught a brief, angled reflection of the audience section. The show had a small live audience tonight, 40, 50 people, seated in tiered rows behind the taping area, most of them engaged in the low-level movement of people waiting for something to begin. He scanned the reflection without moving his head, and stopped. Third row, left section, the gray coat. He couldn't see her face clearly. The monitor was low resolution, the angle was wrong, the reflection itself fragmented the image. But the gray coat was specific. He knew that coat. He had watched her put it on 300 mornings. He had watched her pull the left sleeve down over her wrist in the particular way she did when she was nervous, a habit she'd never noticed she had. She was here. The thought hit him like stepping off a curb in the dark. She was here, inside this building, sitting in the audience section, which meant she either didn't know what was coming or she did know and had come anyway, and both options were equally terrifying for completely different reasons. He had 40 seconds before they went live. He could not move. He could not signal. He could not change anything now without detonating whatever trap had been constructed around tonight. If he stood up and walked to that audience section and put his arms around her and refused to participate in this broadcast, whoever had sent those messages would know the plan had fractured and there was no calculating what they would do next. He thought about the photograph, the precision of it, the patience it represented. He looked back at the camera. 30 seconds, the floor manager called. Garrett Cole settled into his chair across the table, smoothed his jacket, and gave Adrian a brief professional nod. Adrian nodded back. He felt nothing. He was a man who had spent his life treating emotion as a liability, and right now, for the first and worst reason, that training was actually useful. 10 seconds. The studio went quiet the way studios went quiet before a live broadcast, a specific pressurized silence that had a physical weight to it. 5. The on-air light came on. The interview lasted 22 minutes before Garrett Cole asked the question. 22 minutes of questions about the Valor Group's upcoming restructuring, the regulatory environment surrounding private financial operations, Adrian's position on a proposed trade policy that had been generating headlines for 3 weeks. Adrian answered everything with the precision of a man who had rehearsed extensively, which he had, not for this interview specifically, but for the general enterprise of being Adrian Valor in a world that wanted things from Adrian Valor. He kept his breathing even. He kept his hands still. He did not look at the audience section. There's been considerable speculation, Garrett said, shifting tone in the way he did when moving from prepared territory to sharpened territory. About your personal situation, specifically reports of a private marriage contract. Some sources are using the word secret wife. Can you speak to that? The studio was very quiet. Adrian looked at the camera. The silence lasted 2 seconds, which was long enough to be visible, short enough to be recoverable. Then he said it. The sentence he had been carrying since the hotel room. The sentence that tasted like swallowing ground glass. I have no wife. The floor didn't shake. The lights didn't change. No one in the audience made a sound. Or if they did, he couldn't hear it over the blood pressure in his own ears. Garrett Cole held the pause the way professionals did. So the reports are fabricated. I have no wife. I've never been secretly married. He kept his voice level, kept his eyes on the camera. I think whoever is circulating these stories has their own reasons for doing it, and those reasons have nothing to do with my actual personal life. Garrett studied him for one careful second. You understand this is on record. I'm aware. And you're comfortable with that. I'm comfortable with the truth. The lie landed on the word truth and sat there, wagged. In the third row of the audience section, Alara Wynn had both hands folded in her lap. She had known he would do it. She had planned around his doing it. She had spent 11 weeks constructing a version of tonight in which his doing it was the necessary mechanism for everything that came after. She had understood, intellectually and strategically, that this moment was not a betrayal but a transaction, that Adrian was being maneuvered into it, that he believed he was protecting her, that the man she had married would never have chosen this if he believed there was another option. She knew all of this. She pressed her hands together more tightly and felt the absence of the ring on her left hand. She had removed it 2 days ago, leaving it in the drawer of her bedside table because she'd known she couldn't wear it tonight. Not here. The absence was specific and physical in a way that no amount of rational preparation had been able to blunt. She touched the empty space anyway, and she did not look away from him. Because she needed to see it. She needed to carry the memory of his face in this moment, not to punish herself with it, and not to punish him, but because she was about to ask this man to trust her with something larger than either of them. and she needed to know, with her own eyes and not through any intermediary, that he had made this choice believing it was the only one. He had. She could see it in the set of his jaw, the way his hands lay completely still on the table. He was exercising control the way he always did when he was in pain, which was to lock everything down so hard it looked like calm. She had seen that stillness the morning they'd received news that one of his operations had been compromised and 3 of his people had been hurt. She had seen it on the night she'd told him she was pregnant, and he'd gone very quiet for nearly a full minute. Not out of ambivalence, but because the feeling was too large and he didn't have a container for it yet. She knew that stillness. She was watching it now, and it was the thing that kept her hands from shaking. On the monitor mounted near the audience section, she could see the interview continuing. Garrett asking follow-up questions, Adrian redirecting with the smooth mechanical efficiency of a man who had done this 1,000 times. None of it mattered now. The denial had been made. It was already live, already out in the world, already generating the cascade of reactions and notifications and media alerts that Vivian Cross had designed it to generate. The clock on Alara's secondary phone read 8:34 p.m. She had 1 hour and 13 minutes. She stood up quietly, moving the way she'd entered, without drawing attention, without speed, without any gesture that would invite observation. The people seated near her registered her exit the way people registered movement in peripheral vision, as information that did not require a response. She walked up the aisle. At the top, at the corridor entrance, she stopped and turned back once. On the stage, under the studio lights, Adrian was answering a question she couldn't hear from this distance. He was composed and precise and completely alone in the way that only people who are used to being alone can be completely alone in a room full of other people. She looked at him for exactly 3 seconds. Then she turned and walked through the corridor door and let it close behind her. The jet was a Gulfstream G65. Registered to a holding company that did not connect to Alara's name through fewer than 4 layers of corporate documentation. She and Nora had arranged it 8 days ago. Nora was already on board when Alara arrived at the private terminal at 8:58 p.m. The red file in the seat compartment, the flight plan filed for a destination that was real but not final. They would reroute once airborne, once Alara confirmed the next sequence of events had activated properly. Nora Vale was 40 years old and had been Alara's closest friend since they'd worked together at a financial forensics firm 9 years ago. She was also the only person on Earth, besides Alara, who understood the full scope of what was in the red file. She handed Alara a bottle of water the moment she came up the steps and said nothing for a full 30 seconds, which was the right thing to do. "He did it," Alara said. "I saw." Nora had been watching the broadcast on a tablet. She set it face down on the seat beside her. "Are you... Don't." "Right." Nora reached over and pressed Alara's hand once, briefly. "The file is secure. The secondary copies are in position. Your contact at the Oversight Division confirmed receipt of the index at 8:47. Good. Vivian is going to know you were in the building." "Yes." "That changes her timeline." "That's the point." Alara settled into her seat, pulled the seatbelt across, and pressed one hand flat against her stomach again. "Still. If she knows I was there tonight and didn't fight it, if she sees me leaving without a word, without a scene, without any public response, she's going to assume the operation worked. She's going to move on to the next phase. The asset transfer. The asset transfer." Nora was quiet for a moment. Outside, the ground crew is completing the pre-departure check. And when she does, she activates the clause. Alara looked out the small oval window at the dark tarmac. And when she activates the clause, she leaves a legal record that proves she knew it existed, which proves she had access to documents she should never have been able to touch, which proves the entire structure of the operation. She paused. "She's going to hand us everything, Nora. She just doesn't know it yet." Nora exhaled slowly. "And Adrian." Alara didn't answer immediately. The engines were beginning their low, building whine. "He's going to figure out the threat was manufactured," she said finally. "He's not stupid. The moment the broadcast ends and nothing happens, no confirmation, no follow-through from whoever sent those messages, he's going to start pulling it apart. And when he pulls it apart, he's going to find the seams." She stopped. "He's going to be furious." "At Vivian." at himself. She turned away from the window. Going to be furious at himself for believing it, for doing it. She looked at the seat back in front of her. That's going to be the hardest part. Not tonight, though. No. She shook her head. Not tonight. Tonight he doesn't know anything yet. Tonight he thinks it's over. The jet began to move. Elara closed her eyes and let the motion of the aircraft carry her for a moment. The smooth, purposeful roll forward, the sense of momentum building towards something irreversible. She thought about Adrian in the studio, finishing the interview, walking off the set with the mask still on. She thought about the moment he would get back to the hotel room and sit down and understand that the messages hadn't been followed up, that no one had come to confirm compliance, that the entire architecture of the threat was already dissolving because it had been designed not to survive scrutiny, only to survive long enough to accomplish one specific thing. She thought about the look on his face when he understood. She did not let herself think beyond that. Not yet. There was too much that still had to happen, too many pieces still in motion, too much that could still go wrong in ways she hadn't fully accounted for. She opened her eyes. Get some rest, she told Nora. You get some rest. I need to go through the index files again. Elara. She looked at her. Nora held her gaze. You did the right thing tonight. Elara didn't answer. She picked up the manila folder from the seat pocket and opened it on her lap. The clean white pages of financial records and internal communications staring back at her in the aircraft's cabin light. Outside, the terminal lights fell away as the jet accelerated down the runway. She ran her thumb along the top edge of the first page and kept working. But at 9:47 p.m., as scheduled, the message sent itself. Adrian Vaylor was in the back of an SUV moving through city traffic when his personal phone buzzed with a notification from an unfamiliar number. He'd been sitting in silence for 11 minutes. Security driver in front, Marcus in the passenger seat, and he'd spent those 11 minutes deconstructing every second of the evening and finding over and over the thing he couldn't explain. No confirmation. The people who'd sent those messages had not confirmed compliance. They'd told him to deny Elara publicly. He'd done it, and then nothing. No follow-through, no signal that the terms had been honored, no acknowledgement at all. He opened the message. It was a single photograph. Not of Elara this time. It was a photograph of a document, a specific page from a legal filing he hadn't seen in 11 years, a page from the supplementary terms of the Family Inheritance Trust established by his father in 2009. And highlighted in yellow was a clause on the 7th line of the 4th paragraph. He read it. He read it a second time. His hands went very still. The clause stated that in the event of a publicly disputed marriage involving a direct heir of the Vaylor estate, temporary administrative control of the estate's liquid assets would transfer to an external advisory council pending resolution of the dispute. Temporary administrative control. He stared at the highlighted text. Outside, the city moved past the tinted windows in long streaks of light. He knew, with the particular sickening clarity of someone who has just understood that the ground beneath them was never solid, that the threat had never been about Elara. It had never been about protecting her. It had been about making him pull the trigger himself. He looked at Marcus. Marcus was facing forward, his profile visible in the ambient light from the dashboard. He was completely still. The way a person went still when they knew they were being looked at and were deciding whether to turn. He didn't turn. Marcus, Adrian said. A beat. Sir. How long? Not a question. Not, how long have you been compromised, or how long has someone had something over you, or any of the complete grammatical versions of what he was asking. Just, how long? Marcus turned then. His face was controlled, but not the way Adrian's face was controlled. Not discipline, but exhaustion. The expression of someone who had been carrying something for too long and had run out of places to put it. 7 months, Marcus said. Adrian held his gaze. My brother, Marcus said. Nothing else. Just those 2 words, and they carried everything. Adrian looked away, out the window, at the city scrolling past in light and darkness. Where is she? He said. I don't know. Marcus, I genuinely don't know where she is right now. His voice was even, careful. I know she was in the building tonight. I saw her in the audience. He paused. I didn't report it. Adrian processed this, the implication of it. Why not? A long pause. Because I know what's in that file, and I know what it means. And I thought, he stopped, restarted. I thought maybe it needed to get where it was going. Adrian sat with this for a long moment. The SUV moved through an intersection. Your brother, he said. Is he safe? Marcus turned again, and something crossed his face that was not quite surprise, but was close enough to it. I don't know, he said. Not yet. Adrian looked back out the window. Take me to the studio, he said. The broadcast's been over for... I know when it's been over. His voice was flat. Take me back to the studio. Marcus turned forward, said something to the driver. The SUV began to slow for the next turn. Adrian looked down at his phone. The message with the document photograph was still on the screen. He scrolled down, below the image, looking for anything else. There was one more line. 5 words. No sender name. No timestamp visible. She left you the truth. The SUV turned. Adrian closed his hand around the phone. Whatever Alara had constructed, whatever operation she'd built in the weeks and months while he'd been watching the wrong things and trusting the wrong people, was already in motion. He didn't know what it was. He didn't know where she was. He didn't know if any of the pieces still in play were going to land the way she'd intended. What he knew was the sensation currently running through his chest. Not anger, not fear, but the specific vertigo of a man who has just realized that the person he thought he was protecting had been 3 moves ahead of him the entire time. He pressed his forehead briefly against the cool glass of the window. Outside, the city moved. And somewhere in the air above it, on a jet he didn't know the registration of, his wife, the woman he had just publicly erased from his life, opened a red file in her lap and kept working through the night toward a reckoning neither of them would emerge from unchanged. The SUV pulled back toward the studio. And somewhere above the city, Alara's phone lit up. Not a message. Not from Adrian. From a number she didn't recognize. A number that ran through the same routing structure as the ones used to threaten Adrian that evening. The message was 4 words. We know where you are. Alara looked at it, looked out the oval window at the dark beneath the aircraft. And then she looked at Nora. They found us, she said. Nora was already moving. Nora didn't ask questions. That was the thing about her. She had spent 9 years in financial forensics learning to move on information rather than on the comfort of having it fully explained, and that training had calcified into something that looked, from the outside, like an almost frightening absence of panic. She was already at the cockpit door before Alara had finished the sentence. We need to reroute, she said through the door. Right now. Not the secondary destination. The tertiary. The pilot's voice came back muffled, asking for clarification. Don't ask me to explain it. Just do it. She came back and sat down across from Alara, and they looked at each other in the thin cabin light with the phone sitting on the armrest between them like something radioactive. How did they find the jet? Nora said. They didn't find the jet. Alara picked up the phone, looked at the message again. We know where you are. They found the registration. Someone ran the holding company's documentation. She set it back down. It means they have better resources than I calculated, or they have someone inside the aviation authority. She paused. Or both. What do they want? They want me scared. They want me to make a mistake. She looked out the window. Below, city light was giving way to the uninterrupted black of exurban landscape. The message isn't operational. It's psychological. Nora held her gaze. You sound very sure of that. I'm not sure of anything right now. Alara turned back from the window. But acting like I'm sure is the only play I have. Nora was quiet for a moment. The file. The file is intact. The copies are where they're supposed to be. She touched the edge of the manila folder in her lap. Nora. The copies are in position. I verified them at 8:47. Nothing that's happened in the last hour changes the copies. Nora exhaled through her nose. Not relief. Just the sound of someone accepting a situation that had more risk in it than they'd agreed to when they'd started. All right, she said. What do we do about the message? Nothing. We land at the tertiary location. We wait. And the person who sent it? We'll send another one when they don't get a response. Alara closed her eyes briefly. Let them. The jet banked slightly, adjusting course. The engine pitch shifted. Alara felt the movement in her back, in the low ache that had been there since yesterday morning. She needed to sleep. She knew she needed to sleep. Her body had been communicating this need with increasing urgency for the past 6 hours, and she had been refusing to negotiate with it. She put one hand against the armrest and applied pressure, a small, mechanical gesture that helped. Try to rest, Nora said. You said that already. You didn't do it the first time. Alara didn't answer. She opened the folder again and found the page she'd left off at and read it in the aircraft's amber interior light. And Nora, to her credit, said nothing else. At 10:19 p.m., Adrian Valor walked back into the broadcasting center through the same entrance he'd used 4 hours earlier. But this time he didn't have a production credential, a publicist, or any reason that the building's overnight security staff would accept without pushback. He didn't need one. The security officer at the desk was a man named Paul Decker, 58 years old, who had worked building security in this city for 26 years. He recognized Adrian the moment he came through the door, because he had watched the broadcast 90 minutes ago on the small monitor mounted above the desk, same as he watched every broadcast that originated from this building, because the alternative was staring at the lobby wall. Mr. Valor, Decker said carefully, the kind of careful that meant he was doing a rapid calculation about liability. I left something, Adrian said. A pause. The production wrapped, sir. The set's been... I'm not asking about the set. I left something in the secondary production corridor, East Wing. I need 5 minutes. Decker looked at him, looked at Marcus, who had come in behind him and was standing at the edge of the door in a way that was specifically designed to look non-threatening. Then Decker looked back at Adrian. I can't log you in without... I know. Adrian put both hands flat on the desk. Not aggressive, just present. I'm not asking you to log me. I'm asking for 5 minutes. If anything is missing from this building after I leave, you call whoever you need to call, and I will stand in front of whatever process follows. You have my word. The word of a man who'd just publicly denied his own wife. If Decker clocked the irony, he didn't show it. He looked down at the desk for a moment, then stood and took his keycard off the lanyard at his belt and set it on the counter. 5 minutes, he said. East Wing. He sat back down and looked at his monitor. Adrian picked up the keycard and walked. Marcus fell into step behind him. They didn't speak until they were in the east corridor, the overhead fluorescents on their night cycle, half-powered, casting the hallway in dim, institutional light. You said she was in the audience, Adrian said. 3rd row, left section. How long was she there before the broadcast? I first saw her at... Marcus stopped, restarted. I saw the gray coat when I came back through on the second perimeter check. That was approximately 7:25. Which means she was in this building before 8 o'clock. Yes. Adrian stopped walking. What was she doing here, Marcus? I don't know. Yes, you do. Marcus held his position. In the low light, his face was difficult to read, which Adrian suspected was partially intentional. Marcus had spent 9 years learning to give away exactly as much as he chose to give away, and not a fraction more. I think she came to see it, he said, finally, to verify that you did it. Why would she need to verify it? She could have watched a live feed from anywhere. Because watching it in person tells you something that a screen doesn't. He paused. She needed to see your face. Adrian processed this. There's something else, Marcus said. The east corridor, 4th door. He walked past Adrian and moved down the hallway. Adrian followed. At the 4th door, the archive space Alara had used, though Adrian didn't know that yet, Marcus stopped and put his hand on the push-bar handle. It was accessed tonight, he said. During the broadcast window, the magnetic lock cycle was interrupted, which means someone with knowledge of the building's timer system came through here deliberately. He pushed the door. It opened. I found this. Inside on the folding table was a single item, a photograph. Printed, not digital. It showed a conference room that Adrian recognized. The private meeting room on the 14th floor of the Valor Group's primary office building, a room he had been in hundreds of times. At the table in the photograph sat 4 people. 3 of them were attorneys and financial advisors he recognized from his father's era. people he had inherited along with the rest of the organization and had never had cause to examine too closely. The fourth person was Vivian Cross. The date stamp on the photograph was from 11 years ago, 14 months before his father died. Adrian picked it up. He looked at it for a long time. "She left this here," he said. Not a question. "She left it for you," Marcus said. "Specifically, she knew you'd come back." Adrian turned the photograph over. On the back, in handwriting he knew as well as his own, precise, slightly left-leaning, the particular habit of someone who had learned to write with their right hand after an injury to their left, were 7 words. "She was there before you inherited everything." He stood in the archive room holding the photograph with both hands and felt something move through him that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief, but had elements of both. The photograph meant that Vivian's connection to the Valor Empire predated his own leadership by over a decade. It meant that whatever she wanted, whatever had driven the construction of this entire elaborate operation, was rooted in something that happened before Adrian was in control, before he'd made any of the decisions that governed the organization now. It meant this had never been about him at all. It meant he had been the mechanism, not the target. He set the photograph down on the table. "Get your brother's location," he said to Marcus. Marcus went very still. "I don't think that's... I'm not asking for your assessment. Get his location. Tonight." He picked up the photograph again and looked at the date stamp. "And find out everything you can about Vivian Cross's history with this organization prior to 2013. That's going to require access to records that were sealed when I know what it requires." He turned and looked at Marcus with the particular directness that 9 years of proximity had never quite made Marcus comfortable with. "I know what it requires, Marcus. I'm asking if you can do it." A long beat. "Yes," Marcus said. "Then do it." He walked back out into the corridor. Vivian Cross was not, at that moment, in the broadcasting center. She was in a car service vehicle moving through the financial district at a pace that felt, to her, entirely appropriate to the evening. Measured, unhurried, the pace of someone who has done what they came to do and is returning to the next stage of a plan that has been in development for 8 years. She was 51 years old and had been called many things in her professional life. Strategist, fixer, closer. The language of the industry had a dozen ways to describe someone who solved problems that conventional methods couldn't solve, and Vivian had cultivated all of those descriptions carefully, because the best cover for what she actually was, a woman conducting a methodical, multi-decade operation of calculated justice, was to be exactly what the industry expected to see. She looked out the window and thought about the broadcast. Adrian had done it cleanly. She had to give him that. No hesitation she could detect from her position in the control room where she'd watched the feed, no visible fracture in the performance. She had watched his hands particularly. Hands were always the tell, and they had remained still throughout. He was, in that specific and limited respect, impressive. He was also finished. The clause would activate within 72 hours of the broadcast, as soon as the documentation of the public dispute was processed through the appropriate channels, which Vivian had already arranged. The council would take administrative control. The liquid assets would be frozen pending review. And in the resulting chaos, the legal mechanisms she had been positioning for 8 years would finally have room to operate. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. The message was from a contact inside her network, someone she used for tracking and monitoring whose job was to report anomalies. The message read, "Subject departed building at 2102. Private jet. Registration traced. Tertiary routing activated post-departure." Vivian read it twice. She looked up from the phone. Tertiary routing. That meant Alara had anticipated the trace, which meant Alara had anticipated the reach of Vivian's monitoring network, which meant she dialed. The contact picked up on the second ring. "The routing change," Vivian said. "How far out did she plan it?" "The tertiary flight plan was filed 8 days ago," the contact said. "Under a secondary holding entity we didn't have in the original documentation sweep." She layered the registrations. Yes. Vivian was quiet for a moment. Who helped her build that structure? Unknown. The documentation is clean. Nothing's that clean. She looked out the window. The city moved past. She had help from someone with financial architecture experience, the same kind of experience she has. A pause. Pull every professional contact from her tenure at the forensics firm. All of them. Cross-reference with anyone who's had contact with our network in the past 18 months. That's a significant... I know how significant it is. Start tonight. She ended the call. She sat in the car with the phone in her lap and felt, for the first time since the operation began, the specific texture of something she hadn't accounted for. Not fear. She'd moved past fear a long time ago. Something more precise than that. The sensation of a plan encountering a variable it hadn't modeled correctly. Elara Wynn was not reacting. She was operating. And there was a difference. And Vivian had spent 8 years designing an operation built around the assumption that when pushed hard enough and humiliated publicly enough, Elara would react, would fight or flee or appeal to someone, would make a visible, traceable move that Vivian could use. Instead, she had left a private jet on a tertiary flight plan filed 8 days ago, which meant Elara had anticipated that the operation would reach her and had prepared for it without tipping her hand, which meant Elara had known more than Vivian had believed she knew. The car stopped at a light. Vivian put the phone back in her coat pocket and sat very still for a moment, looking at nothing. "Change of plans," she said to the driver. "Take me to the office." Adrian's call to Elara's personal phone went to voicemail at 10:47 p.m. He stood in the lobby of the broadcasting center with Paul Decker's keycard in his hand, listening to her voice on the recording, calm, measured, the professional version of her voice that she used for work contacts. And he did not leave a message. He called again at 10:52. Voicemail. At 10:58, a text message appeared on his phone from the same unfamiliar number that had sent the photograph of the legal clause. 3 words this time. She can't answer. His jaw tightened. He typed back, "If anything happens to her, I will personally dismantle everything you've built." The response came in under 30 seconds. "She's fine. She's the one who's been dismantling you." He stared at his phone. Marcus appeared at his elbow. "We need to move." "Who sent these messages?" "I don't know the specific identity of..." "Take a guess." He turned to face Marcus with the full weight of 9 years of earned trust now sitting on the other side of a new and irrevocable calculation. "You've been inside their operation for 7 months. You've been watching how they communicate, how they structure their network. Take a guess." Marcus held his gaze. "The messages to you," he said carefully, "went through a routing structure I recognize from the communication patterns they used with me. But the pattern changed tonight." He paused. "After the broadcast, someone started using a different architecture, someone who routes through multiple layers and doesn't leave the same syntactic signature. Different person. Different person, or the same person being very careful that you'd notice the difference." Adrian thought about the 7 words on the back of the photograph. She was there before you inherited everything. He thought about the way Elara had been sitting in the 3rd row of the audience section, hands folded in her lap, watching him destroy their marriage on live television, and had then gotten up and walked out of the building and boarded a jet. Not fighting, not running, operating. "She's been inside their communication network," he said slowly. Marcus said nothing. "She's been watching how they communicate. She built the tertiary routing before they could trace the registration because she already knew how far their reach extended." He looked at Marcus. "She didn't just discover Vivian's operation. She's been running a counter-operation against it." "That's..." Marcus stopped. "What?" "That's a significant exposure for her. If they identified what she was doing at any point, they didn't." The certainty in his own voice surprised him. They didn't identify it, or they would have moved against her weeks ago instead of waiting for tonight. He turned back toward the lobby doors. She let them get all the way to the broadcast because she needed to see how far they'd push it. She needed the full picture. He pushed through the doors into the night air. The city was loud and cold and indifferent in the way that cities were at 11 p.m. The particular urban indifference of a place where 1,000 different private crises were playing out simultaneously in adjacent buildings and no one had the bandwidth to register any of them. Marcus came out behind him. "If she's been building a counter-operation," Marcus said, "then she has documentation we don't know about." "Yes." "And she's been moving it into position." "Yes." "Then why hasn't she used it yet?" Adrian stopped. He stood on the sidewalk outside the broadcasting center and looked up at the building's facade. All glass and steel, the infrastructure of public performance, the architecture of controlled narrative. "Because she hasn't needed to yet," he said. He thought about the red file. He didn't know about the red file specifically, but he knew Alara. He knew how she worked. He had watched her, in 14 months of marriage and 3 years of knowing her before that, approach every problem the same way. She gathered everything before she moved anything. She built the complete picture and then acted with precision rather than urgency. She was out there somewhere above the city, on a jet he couldn't trace, with documentation he hadn't seen, in a situation where someone had just sent her a message telling her they knew where she was, and she had responded by changing course, not by calling him, not by asking for help, by changing course and continuing. He put his hands in his coat pockets and felt the specific, acute discomfort of a man accustomed to being the most dangerous person in any given situation, coming to terms with the fact that in this particular situation, he was the variable that everyone else was managing around. His phone buzzed. Not a message, a call. Unknown number, but a different format from the previous ones. A direct call rather than a routed text, which meant whoever was calling either didn't care about anonymity or was making a deliberate choice to be traceable. He answered. Silence on the line for 2 seconds. Then a voice, female, controlled, with the specific flatness of someone who had learned to speak without emotional inflection, the way others learned a second language. "Mr. Vaylor," Vivian Cross said. He did not respond. "You went back to the building," she said. "I expected that. I imagine you found what was left for you." A pause. "Your wife is very precise. It's one of the things I've come to genuinely respect about her." "What do you want?" "I want you to understand something clearly before tomorrow morning." Her voice was even, unhurried, the voice of someone who has done a great deal of waiting and has gotten comfortable with the texture of it. "The clause activates in 72 hours. Nothing you do before then changes that. The documentation has already been processed." "Then why are you calling me?" A pause. "Because," she said, "I want you to know that this was never personal. I want you to understand what your father did. I want you to go into the next 72 hours with full knowledge of what you're defending. I'm not defending anything. Everyone defends their inheritance, even when they know it's rotten." Her voice didn't change. "Your father made decisions that destroyed people, specific people, families. He built the financial foundation of everything you now control on a structure that required those people to lose everything so that he could gain it." She paused. "I was one of those families." The line was quiet. Adrian stood on the sidewalk outside the broadcasting center and listened to a silence that had an enormous amount of weight in it. "Come to the Meridian Hotel," he said finally. "Tonight." A longer pause. "No," she said. "Then tell me where." "I don't think you understand the nature of this conversation, Mr. Vaylor. I'm not negotiating with you. I'm informing you." Her voice was still controlled, still flat, but there was something underneath it now. Not heat exactly, but the presence of heat that had been banked and contained for so long it had become structural. "You should spend the next few hours considering what you actually know about how your empire was built. Not what you were told, what you can actually verify." She ended the call. Adrian lowered the phone. Marcus was watching him from 6 feet away with the expression of someone who understood that the next several hours were going to require things from him that he hadn't been prepared to give. "She called you directly," Marcus said. "Yes." "That means she's not afraid of being traced." "No." "Which means she's already beyond the point where being traced matters to her." He paused. "She's going to activate the clause regardless of what we do." "Yes." Adrian looked at his phone again, thought about what Vivian had said. What you can actually verify. "Marcus, the Family Foundation's original documentation, the 2009 trust structure, where is the physical copy?" "The primary archive in the..." "Not the primary, the original, the version my father filed before the amendments." He turned. "Where is it?" Marcus's expression shifted in a way that was subtle and complete, the micro-expression of someone who is deciding in real time whether to give up information they've been keeping. Marcus. The secondary facility, Marcus said quietly. The one on Elner Street. The basement archive. He stopped. I didn't know what was in it. Not specifically. I knew it was sealed and that your father had given specific instructions that it not be reviewed without... Can you get me in? The pause lasted 3 full seconds. Yes, Marcus said. But Adrian. His voice had dropped, not to a whisper but to the register of something private and heavy. If what's in there is what I think it might be, if it connects to what Vivian Cross has been saying, then you can't unknow it. Adrian looked at him. I'm already past the point of unknowing things, he said. He started walking toward the car. Marcus stood for a moment on the sidewalk outside the broadcasting center, looking at nothing in particular, before he followed. And in the brief window of that pause, something moved through his face that had no easy name. Not regret exactly, not relief, but the expression of someone standing at the exact moment when the decision they avoided for 7 months finally catches up with them and turns out to look exactly like they knew it would. He followed Adrian to the car. The driver pulled away from the curb. And in the secondary facility on Elner Street, 3 miles away in a building that hadn't had a logged visitor entry in 11 years, a sealed archive waited in the dark with everything in it that Adrian Vaylor had spent his entire life inheriting without ever being allowed to see. The building on Elner Street had no signage. That was the first thing Adrian registered when the car stopped in front of it at 11:47 p.m. Not the architecture, not the security measures visible from the street, but the absence of any identifying marker whatsoever. Every other building on this block had something. A number, a company name etched into the facade, a directory placard beside the entrance. This one had a door, 2 cameras mounted at opposing angles above it, and nothing else. It was the kind of absence that was itself a statement, and the statement was, nothing here requires acknowledgement. He had driven past this building hundreds of times over the course of his adult life. He had never once thought about it. Marcus used a physical key, not a card, not a code, an actual cut metal key that he produced from an interior jacket pocket with the careful deliberateness of someone who had been holding it for a long time and had developed a specific relationship with its weight. The lock was heavy-duty, the kind installed in the 1980s and maintained rather than replaced, because the people who used it trusted mechanical systems more than digital ones. The door opened. The air inside was the particular air of spaces that are climate-controlled but not occupied, a dry, almost antiseptic stillness that had no human smell in it, no coffee or paper dust or the accumulated metabolic residue of people working, just controlled temperature and darkness. Marcus found the light panel. Fluorescent strips came on in sequence, illuminating a corridor that ran straight back into the building for approximately 40 feet before turning left. The walls were painted institutional gray. The floor was sealed concrete. There were no decorative elements of any kind. How many times have you been here? Adrian said. 3, Marcus said. Once when I was first given the key, once 6 years ago when there was a question about a document retrieval, and once... He stopped. Once 7 months ago. Adrian looked at him. They asked me to confirm the layout, Marcus said. His voice was level but effortful. The people who have my brother. They wanted to know if the archive was still intact, if the original documentation was still here. A pause. I told them yes. You told them the original documentation still existed? Yes. So they've known for 7 months that this archive is here and what's in it? Yes. Adrian absorbed this while walking. The corridor turned left as anticipated and descended a half-flight of stairs. The basement level, low ceilings, the fluorescents here older and slightly warmer in tone, a few of them flickering at the edge of their operational lifespan. At the bottom of the stairs was a second door, heavier than the first, with a combination mechanism in addition to the key lock. The combination, Adrian said. Marcus gave it to him. 7 digits. Adrian dialed it himself, because there were some things you did yourself when you no longer had a clean read on who you were standing next to. The door opened. The archive was a single large room. Metal shelving units arranged in parallel rows, floor to ceiling, each shelf holding labeled banker's boxes in a system that was organized by year. The earliest boxes, on the far left wall, were dated in the mid-1970s. The organization ran chronologically from left to right. In the center of the room was a heavy wooden table with 2 chairs and a single adjustable lamp. Adrian walked to the right wall and found the section dated 2009. There were 11 boxes covering that year. He pulled the first one, set it on the table, and opened it. Financial records. Standard operating documentation, the kind that showed up in any large organization's administrative archive. Budget approvals, vendor contracts, board minutes. He paged through quickly, looking for the anomaly, the thing that didn't fit the pattern of routine administration. He found the third box. Inside, beneath a layer of standard correspondence, was a folder with no label. He opened it. The documents inside were on paper that had aged slightly differently from the surrounding material, slightly more yellowed, slightly more brittle at the edges, as if they had been stored in a different condition before being placed here. The top document was a partnership agreement, standard format at first glance. He read it and read it again. The partnership agreement was between the Vaylor Family Foundation and a holding company called Oren Capital Partners. The agreement dated from March 2009, 4 years before his father's death. The terms of the agreement gave Oren Capital Partners access to a specific tranche of the foundation's investment portfolio, a tranche that Adrian, reviewing the foundation's structure when he took over, had been told was composed of legacy assets from the 1990s that had been written down and were essentially dormant. He had never looked closely at those assets because he'd been told there was nothing to look at. He turned to the second document. It was a transfer record, a series of transactions, each individually sized to stay below the reporting threshold, each moving through a different intermediary, each ultimately arriving at the same destination. A series of accounts held by Oren Capital Partners' subsidiary entities. He counted the transfers, 47 transactions, over a period of 8 months in 2009. The total amount moved was just over $73 million. He turned to the third document. It was a correspondence file, printed emails, which meant they were from an era when printing emails for physical archiving was still standard practice, and also that whoever had printed them had wanted a hard copy that existed independently of any server. The emails were between his father. The email address was one Adrian recognized, his father's primary business account, and a person identified only by initials in the thread, CV. He read the emails. He read all of them. It took him 14 minutes, standing at the table with Marcus sitting in the chair across from him and not speaking, and during those 14 minutes the only sounds in the archive room were the faint electrical hum of the climate control system and the occasional turn of a page. When he finished, he set the correspondence file down. He stood there with his hands flat on the table and looked at nothing. CV was Caroline Vivian, Vivian Cross's mother. The emails documented a negotiation. His father had been negotiating with Caroline Vivian over the terms of a land acquisition, a series of properties in the eastern part of the state that had been held by the Vivian family for 3 generations, agricultural land with underlying mineral rights that his father had identified as strategically valuable. The negotiation had been extended over 8 months. His father had used the partnership agreement, the access to the foundation's investment portfolio, as leverage, offering to invest in projects Caroline Vivian was developing in exchange for the land transfer. But the investment had never materialized. His father had moved the money through the foundation, used the promise of it as leverage to secure the land transfer at below market value, and then restructured the foundation's holdings in a way that made the committed investment disappear into a series of write-offs. Caroline Vivian had sold 3 generations of family land for a promise that had been engineered from the beginning to evaporate. The last email in the thread was dated November 2009. It was from Caroline Vivian to his father. It was 4 sentences long. Adrian read those 4 sentences once and then set the file down and did not read them again, because there was a point at which information stopped being information and started being something that altered the physical environment of wherever you were standing. "She had a daughter," he said. His voice came out flat. Not because he was suppressing anything, because the flatness was genuine, the sound of a man whose processing capacity was fully occupied and had nothing left over for vocal modulation. Yes, Marcus said. Vivian Cross. Her mother was the one my father, Yes. He looked at Marcus. You knew. Not an accusation, a calibration. I suspected, Marcus said carefully, when they gave me the information about this archive, some of what they said, the way they described the contents, what they were looking for, it suggested they already knew what was here, that they weren't looking for new information. They were looking for confirmation that the original document still existed. He stopped. I didn't know about Caroline Vivian specifically, but I understood that the operation had a personal origin. Why didn't you tell me? Marcus said nothing for a moment. Because I didn't know if telling you would save my brother or cost him his life, he said. And I didn't know if you were the right person to tell. The statement sat in the climate-controlled air of the archive room. Adrian turned back to the documents. He looked at the transfer records. He looked at the partnership agreement with its careful legal language, the kind of language specifically designed to create the appearance of legitimate process around something that was not legitimate. He thought about his father, the version of his father he had known, the version that had been presented to him throughout his life. Rigorous, demanding, a man who built empires because he had a genius for identifying value and a willingness to absorb risk that most people couldn't tolerate. He thought about the version of his father that existed in these documents. They were not incompatible, which was the thing that made it worse. A man could be genuinely brilliant and genuinely ruthless, and those qualities did not cancel each other out. They compounded. The intelligence made the ruthlessness more effective. The ruthlessness made the intelligence more dangerous. His father had not been a crude person. He had been an architect. He had designed structures that achieved his purposes while maintaining a surface of legality and strategic plausibility, and he had done it with enough skill that the structures had survived his death and continued to define the organization Adrian had inherited. Adrian had spent 3 years running an empire built on this foundation. He had not known. He admitted to himself in the silence of the archive room, not looked. There was a difference between not knowing and not looking. He had always told himself that the first described him. He understood, standing at this table at midnight in his father's sealed archive, that the second described him more accurately. He gathered the 3 documents, replaced everything else, and closed the box. The copies that Vivian has, he said, these same documents. I assume so. She's had them for 8 years. That's consistent with what they told me about the operation's timeline. He picked up the folder. She's been building this for 8 years, and she still went through an operation this elaborate instead of simply releasing the documents publicly. He looked at Marcus. Why? Marcus thought about it. Public release proves your father's wrongdoing. It doesn't necessarily translate into legal consequence for the current organization. The inheritance clause is different. The clause gives her actual control, temporary but real, over the assets themselves. She wants more than exposure. She wants restitution. Marcus paused. She wants the money. Not personally, I think, but she wants the financial consequence to be real, not just the reputational one. Adrian was quiet. He thought about the last email from Caroline Vivian, the 4 sentences. They had been written by a woman who had understood by November 2009 that she had been defrauded, that the investment she'd been promised in exchange for her family's land was gone and was not coming back. The sentences were not hysterical. They were not even angry, in a conventional sense. They were the sentences of someone who has moved past the acute phase of shock into something more durable and more dangerous. The last sentence had read, "My daughter will know what your name means." He picked up his phone. He had 9 missed calls, 3 from his legal team, 2 from the Valor Group's communications director, 1 from a board member whose name he associated with the era of his father's leadership, 1 from a number he didn't recognize, 1 from Nora Vale's personal number, which he had because Alara had added it to his contacts 8 months ago, and he'd never had occasion to use it, and 1 logged at 11:31 p.m. from a number that showed up in his contacts under a name he'd entered himself 4 months ago when Alara had told him this was the number to use if anything ever went wrong and he couldn't reach her primary phone. He called it. It rang 4 times. "I was wondering when you'd use this number," Alara said. Her voice was level, clear. The background was the specific ambient sound of aircraft interior. He'd flown enough private jets to know the particular blend of engine hum and pressurized air. "Are you safe?" he said. "Relative term." "Alara." "We rerouted. We're landing in approximately 40 minutes. A pause. "Did you find the archive?" He stopped, looked at Marcus, who had the expression of someone who was trying to be invisible in a room he was physically present in. "How do you know about the archive?" "Marcus is building access logs. The key was signed out from the security inventory 3 times in the past decade. I traced the second instance, the document retrieval 6 years ago, through the administrative request that preceded it." Her voice was matter-of-fact, the voice of someone reporting findings rather than revealing surprises. "I knew the archive existed. I didn't know specifically what was in it. I was working from the financial records and the transfer documentation, which I found through a different channel." "You've been building this case for 11 weeks, with what I had access to." A pause. "What's in the archive?" He told her. She was quiet for a moment after he finished. Not the silence of surprise. The silence of someone absorbing confirmation. "Caroline Vivian," she said. "Yes." "That explains the timeline." Another pause, shorter. "She would have been young when her mother died. If she connected the land loss to her mother's deterioration, she sent a message tonight." He cut across her gently. "She called me directly. She said she wants me to understand what my father did before the clause activates. She wants you to go in with full knowledge." "Yes." "That's not a tactical move," Alara said. "That's personal." "I know." The line was quiet for a moment. Through the connection, he could hear the faint shift of the aircraft, some minor turbulence. He thought about her in the cabin, pregnant, working through this by herself in the air, surrounded by documents and a phone and whatever she'd managed to build without him. "Alara." He stopped. "Try it again. The message tonight. The one that told me to deny you." He stopped again. He was not, in general, a man who struggled to say things. He struggled now. "I should have... Don't." Her voice was quiet, not harsh, just quiet and certain. "Not right now. We don't have time for that right now, and I don't have the... I need to stay focused." A beat. "We'll have time for the rest of it later. I'm going to hold you to that." "All right." "There's something else," she said. "Something I didn't tell Nora yet because I needed to be sure." Her voice shifted. A fractional change in register, the particular tone she used when she was about to say something she'd been sitting with for a long time. "The oversight contact I sent the file index to. The one who confirmed receipt at 8:47. "Yes." "I haven't been able to reach them since 9 p.m. He felt the floor of the situation drop. "What does that mean?" "It means either they went dark voluntarily because the information is sensitive enough to require immediate internal compartmentalization." She stopped. "Or it means someone inside the oversight division knew the file was coming and intercepted the contact before they could act on it." The archive room felt very small suddenly. "If the contact was intercepted," he said slowly, "then the index reached someone inside Vivian's network instead of the oversight division." "Yes." "Which means she knows what's in the file." "She may have known for the past 3 hours." Alara's voice was steady, frightening in its steadiness. "Which means everything I built the counter-operation around, the documentary evidence, the oversight intervention, the legal architecture, may already be compromised." He stood in the archive room at midnight, holding a folder of documents about his father's crimes, and felt the specific lurching sensation of a plan being invalidated in real time. "Where is the physical file?" "On this jet. The copies." "In position as of 8:47. I haven't been able to verify their status since the contact went dark." A pause. "I've been trying." "Who else knows the copy locations?" "Nora, and one other person." She stopped. And in the stop, in the fractional delay before she continued, He heard something he had never heard in Elara's voice in 4 years of knowing her. Not panic. Something underneath panic. The sound of someone who has built something carefully and is watching the possibility emerge that it was built on a compromised foundation. The person who helped me establish the financial holding structures for the jet registrations. The contact who has the deepest knowledge of the overall architecture. Who is it? Another pause. Longer. His name is Daniel Reeves, she said. He's a financial architect. I've worked with him for 6 years. He's the person who built the layered registration structure Vivian's people couldn't trace. She stopped. He's also the person who confirmed the oversight contact's identity for me before I used them. The silence on the line had a particular quality. Elara, he said. I know. Her voice was very quiet now. I know. Because if Daniel Reeves had confirmed the oversight contact's identity, and if the oversight contact was now unreachable, there were 2 explanations. The first was that the contact had been independently identified and intercepted by Vivian's network after the fact. The second was that the contact had never been trustworthy, and the person who had vouched for them had known that. 6 years, he said. Yes. Have you been in contact with him tonight? I sent a verification message at 9:15, standard protocol, a coded phrase that should have generated an automatic response within 20 minutes. She stopped. I'm still waiting for the response. He checked his watch. It was 12:04 a.m., 2 hours and 49 minutes with no response. Where is he based? He operates remotely. I've never had a physical address for him. A pause that had weight in it. That was by design. His design. I accepted it because the financial structures he built were verifiably clean. I had them independently reviewed through 2 separate forensic firms before I used them. Her voice was doing something careful now, something controlled. I was thorough. I know you were. I did everything correctly. I know. And someone still... She stopped. He waited. If he was inside their network, she said, then the entire architecture of the counter-operation was being monitored from the beginning, the holding structures, the flight routing, the oversight contact. Her voice went very quiet. The file index. The file itself. The file itself is here, on this jet. That's real. A beat. But everything I built to protect it and deploy it may have been built inside a structure that Vivian's people were watching the entire time. He had nothing to say to that, not because there was nothing to say, but because what needed to be said first was not words. He understood this the way he understood very few things, with the full, unambiguous clarity of a man who has arrived at the center of a situation and can see all the walls. Land, he said. Whatever the tertiary destination is, land, get off that jet, and don't use any of the communication channels tied to the financial architecture. That's most of my secure channels. I know. Use your personal phone. Call me directly when you're on the ground. He paused. The physical file doesn't leave your hands. It hasn't. Don't let Nora hold it either. I know you trust her. A beat. You think the contamination goes that far? I think we don't know how far it goes, and until we do, the file stays with you. He stopped. Can you do that? Yes. 40 minutes. Approximately. I'll be moving. He looked at Marcus. Call me when you land. He ended the call. He set the phone down on the table and stood for a moment with both hands flat on the folder of his father's documents, and the specific silence of someone absorbing the full dimensions of a situation they are now irrevocably inside. Marcus was watching him. The counter-operation may be compromised, Adrian said. I heard. Which means we don't know what Vivian's network has access to. We don't know what they've been watching. We don't know how much of what Elara built was being observed from the inside. He picked up the phone. And we have 72 hours before the clause activates, and someone else takes administrative control of everything my father built on a foundation of fraud. Marcus said nothing. I need your brother's location, Adrian said. Right now, not tomorrow, not after you've run an assessment. Right now, Marcus. I don't have direct access to... Call whoever you need to call. His voice didn't rise. It dropped. which was a thing it did when he was not performing authority but actually using it. I don't care what it cost you. I don't care what it exposes. Call whoever you've been communicating with for the past 7 months and tell them you need confirmation of your brother's location. And if they don't give it to you, tell them that what comes next is going to cost them considerably more than what they gain from the clause. Marcus looked at him for a long moment. They're going to know something's changed, he said. Yes. It's going to accelerate their timeline. Marcus. He met his eyes. Their timeline is already accelerated. Ilara's oversight contact went dark 3 hours ago. They are not waiting on us. He paused. Your brother is leverage they no longer need if they think the operation is complete. You understand what that means. Marcus understood what that meant. He took out his phone. He dialed a number and put the phone to his ear, and in the silence while it rang, the archive room held both of them in its climate-controlled stillness. The folder of crimes on the table between them, the boxes of the past arranged in their labeled rows on the shelves around them, the entire inherited weight of decisions made by people who were either dead or had been very carefully never seen. The call connected. Marcus said 3 words. Then he listened. His face did not change in any way that was dramatic or visible. But when he lowered the phone, the look in his eyes was one that Adrian recognized. The look of someone who has just received confirmation of something they were hoping was wrong. Where? Adrian said. Marcus told him the address. And then he said, There's something else. He paused. They said to tell you something. A specific message. He looked down at the phone in his hand. They said, We've already spoken to Reeves. Ask your wife what she built and who she built it for. The archive room was very quiet. Adrian looked at the address Marcus had given him, which he had already entered into his phone, and then he looked at the last message on his screen from Ilara. Call me when you land. And he felt the architecture of the night shift around him one more time in a way that he could not yet fully interpret, but that had the specific gravity of something that was going to require him to be a different person than the one he had been for the previous 43 years. Not better, just different. Because the person he had been for 43 years had inherited a fraud, trusted the wrong people, and publicly destroyed his own marriage because a threat was more believable to him than the idea that his wife was already several moves ahead. He put the phone in his pocket. He picked up the folder. He walked toward the door of the archive and said, without turning, You're going to have to decide right now which side of this you're actually on. Behind him, Marcus was silent for exactly 4 seconds. Then he said, I already decided. When? When I didn't report her to them in the audience tonight. Adrian pushed the door open. Then stay close, he said, and walked back out into the corridor toward whatever was left of the night and the long, irreversible walk into the truth that someone had been making sure he never had to see. The address Marcus gave him was a warehouse conversion in the Port District, 4 miles from the archive building, in the kind of neighborhood that had been industrial for so long that the industrial character had become structural rather than economic. Not a place waiting to be redeveloped, but a place that had decided at some point that it was what it was and had no interest in being otherwise. Adrian told the driver to stop 2 blocks short. He and Marcus got out and walked the rest of the way in the cold, moving on the sidewalk's outer edge, away from the streetlights. The temperature had dropped since midnight. Adrian's breath came out visible, thin columns of vapor that dissolved immediately into the dark. He could feel his pulse in his throat, not racing, but elevated, the particular pitch of a heart that has been running on adrenaline for 6 hours and is starting to negotiate with the body's physical limits. He ignored it. How many people does she typically run at a location like this? He said quietly. 2 to 4 for security. The operation coordinator runs lean. Marcus was half a step behind him, matching his pace. She doesn't like large footprints. Armed. The security, yes. Vivian herself. I've never seen her carry. My brother. We'll be in a contained interior space. Ground level, most likely. Marcus paused. They'll have a monitor on his location. The moment we approach the building, they'll know. Unless? Unless what? Unless they already think they've won. Adrian stopped at the corner of the block. The warehouse was visible from here, a large, converted structure, a few windows on the upper level showing light, the loading dock area on the south side dark and still. They sent that message 40 minutes ago. Ask your wife what she built and who she built it for. That message was designed to do one thing. Make you doubt her. Make me doubt her enough to stop moving, to sit with it, to spend the next several hours running a different calculation instead of coming here. He looked at the building. They think the message worked. Marcus absorbed this. And if they're wrong about that, then they're running the same overconfidence my father ran, the certainty that the threat lands hard enough to buy them whatever time they need. He started walking again. It's a family trait, apparently. They moved along the south side of the building, staying in the shadow of the dock overhang. The concrete beneath their feet was uneven, old industrial paving, decades of heavy vehicle use, patches of repair that hadn't matched the original surface. Adrian stepped carefully, not for silence, but to avoid the kind of stumble that would cost him a second he might need later. At the corner of the building, Marcus put a hand on his arm. They stopped. There was a door ahead, a standard metal entry door, not a dock door. And beside it, a man in a dark jacket standing with his back partly to them, his attention directed toward the street side of the building. He was holding a phone in one hand and looking at it intermittently, which meant he was either monitoring something or he was bored and losing discipline, and both options were workable. Adrian and Marcus stood in the shadow for 11 seconds. Then the man's phone rang. He turned completely away to answer it. They moved. The door was unlocked, a detail that registered as either careless or deliberate, and Adrian filed it without committing to an interpretation. Inside was a short corridor, concrete walls, a staircase going up, and a hallway going straight. The upper level had the lights. He went straight. The hallway opened into a large interior space. The main floor of the warehouse, partially subdivided with temporary partition walls into a rough operational layout. Equipment cases along one wall. A folding table with a laptop set up, currently unoccupied. 2 halogen work lights providing illumination. And at the far end, past the partition, a door with a padlock on the exterior hasp. Adrian pointed. Marcus nodded. They crossed the main floor in 12 seconds. The padlock was keyed, not combination, and Marcus produced the same ring he'd used at the archive. A second key, smaller, which he'd clearly been carrying for exactly this contingency. He opened it without speaking. The room beyond was small. A cot, a folding chair, a battery-powered lamp on the floor. A man in his early 30s, dark circles under his eyes, a bruise along his jaw that was 3 or 4 days old based on the color. He was awake. He looked up when the door opened and his face did something complicated. Not relief exactly, because relief had been anticipated and then withdrawn enough times that it had become dangerous to feel immediately. "Hey," Marcus said. His brother, the name came out later, much later, but in this moment he was just the shape of what Marcus had spent 7 months paying for. Looked at him for a long second. "You're late," he said. "Yeah." Marcus's voice had something in it that he covered fast. "I know, come on." Adrian had already turned back to the main floor. He was 3 steps across it when the laptop on the folding table lit up. He stopped. The screen showed a video call interface, an incoming connection, activating automatically. He stood and watched it connect, because there was a particular kind of threat that you did not turn your back on, and this was one of them. Vivian Cross appeared on the screen. She was in a well-lit space, not the warehouse, not any location he recognized, an office or a hotel room, the background deliberately neutral. She was wearing the same clothes she'd had on in the studio earlier, which meant she hadn't slept and didn't intend to. She looked at Adrian with the focused, measuring attention of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. "You move faster than I expected," she said. "Your people told me the address." "I know. I told them to." She held his gaze. "I needed to know if you'd come for Marcus's brother or if you'd go after your wife first." "I don't follow your logic. You came here first. That tells me something about you." She tilted her head slightly. "It tells me you're either a better man than your reputation suggests, or you've already decided that Alara can take care of herself." "Both." A pause. "She probably can," Vivian said. "Take care of herself. She's been doing it since she started digging into your foundation's records 11 weeks ago." She paused. She's also been working inside a structure that Daniel Reeves built, and Daniel Reeves has been inside my network for 4 years. So you've been watching her entire operation. The architecture of it, yes, the financial layer. Her voice was even, informational. Not the file. I know it exists. I know approximately what it contains. I don't have the physical file, and I don't have the copies, because your wife layered her document security in a way that Daniel couldn't access without her direct involvement, and she's careful enough that she never gave him direct involvement. A pause. She's very good, Mr. Vaylor. You should know that. Why are you telling me this? Because I want tonight to end with the truth visible, she said. Not with one side winning and one side losing. With the truth visible. Her expression didn't change, but something in the quality of her stillness did. I've been building this operation for 8 years. I could have released the documentation 3 years ago. I had enough by then. But you wanted the clause. I wanted consequence, real consequence, not a news cycle. She looked directly into the camera. Your father took $73 million from my mother. Not directly. Through layers, through legal architecture, through instruments specifically designed to make theft look like failed investment. My mother spent the last 4 years of her life trying to understand what had happened to her family's assets. She died not understanding it. She stopped. I spent the 8 years after that understanding it. The warehouse was very quiet. The clause gives you control of liquid assets worth considerably more than $73 million, Adrian said. Yes. You're not just recovering what he took. No. She held his gaze. No, I'm not. Your father's money grew for 20 years on a foundation that included what he took from my family and from others. I found 4 additional operations running the same structure, Mr. Vaylor. 4 other families. The total extraction across all 5 operations over the period from 2007 to 2011 is approximately $420 million. Her voice was steady. The clause gives me administrative control over a portion of assets equivalent to what those 5 families lost, adjusted for 2 decades of compound growth. He stood in the warehouse light looking at the screen and did the math that she'd laid out and felt the number land in his chest with the weight of a physical object. $420 million. 5 families. His father had done this 5 times. How many of those families do you have documentation on? He said. All of them. She reached off screen and came back with something. A folder, similar in size to the one he was carrying. Everything your wife found in the financial records is part of a larger picture. She found the Vivian family thread because it was the most recent and the least carefully obscured. The earlier operations were better hidden. She set the folder down. I spent 8 years finding all of them. He thought about Alara, 400 feet in the air on a jet, working through a file she'd built with 11 weeks in compromised infrastructure. And he thought about Vivian Cross at 51, 8 years of patient, methodical construction, and he felt the 2 of them like 2 lines drawn from different starting points arriving at the same location from opposite directions. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He didn't take it out. What do you want from me right now? He said. Tonight. I want to know if you're going to fight the clause. The clause is a legal instrument. My legal team will... Your legal team will do what you tell them. She cut across him cleanly. I'm asking what you're going to tell them. He looked at her. She looked back. I don't know yet, he said. It was the most honest thing he'd said to anyone in the past 6 hours. Vivian's expression shifted, not softening, but something in it adjusted, as if an instrument that had been held at maximum tension was brought back 1 degree. That's the first thing you've said tonight that I believe, she said. His phone vibrated again. He pulled it out. The screen showed Alara's emergency number, set, the one he'd called from the archive. He looked at Vivian on the laptop screen. I need to take this. I know, she paused. Mr. Vaylor, whatever Alara tells you, whatever she found, whatever she built, don't let it make you do what your instinct is telling you to do right now. What is my instinct telling me to do? Control the situation. Her voice was quiet. You can't control this situation. No one can anymore. That's actually the point. He answered the phone as he walked away from the laptop screen, moving back across the warehouse floor toward the corridor. I'm on the ground, Ilara said. Her voice was different now, tighter, the composure still there but working harder. We landed at the tertiary field. There were 2 vehicles waiting at the perimeter. He stopped walking. Describe them. Black SUVs, no plates visible from inside the terminal building. A breath. They haven't moved. They're just sitting there. How many people? I can see 2 in each vehicle from this angle. A pause. Nora counted 4. There may be more we can't see. 4 vehicles, 8 people minimum. At a private airfield in the middle of the night, waiting at the perimeter of an aircraft they'd traced through a registration structure they'd been monitoring for months. The file, he said. I have it. Don't let it out of your hands. I know, Adrian. The terminal building. Is there another exit? Checking. He could hear her moving. Footsteps, the faint sound of a door, the particular echo of an empty building. There's a maintenance access on the north side. It opens onto a service road. A pause. The service road runs parallel to the runway for about a quarter mile, then cuts toward the highway. Is the north side visible from the perimeter vehicles? No, the terminal building is between them and the north exit. Another pause. But if they have someone on foot, we won't see them in the dark. He turned and looked back at Marcus, who was standing at the mouth of the corridor with his brother, both of them watching Adrian with the particular attention of people who understand they are in the secondary position of a situation that is moving fast. Marcus, he said, your contact in the aviation network. I have one, yes. Can they get a vehicle to a private field in, he calculated, 25 minutes? Which field? Ilara, he said into the phone. The field designation. She gave him the code. He relayed it to Marcus, who was already dialing. Ilara, the maintenance exit. Don't use it yet. Wait for my signal. He paused. How's Nora? She's steady. She's scared, but she's not showing it. How are you? A beat. The beat lasted long enough to mean something. I'm fine, she said. The baby's fine. I checked. He exhaled. 20 minutes, he said. Maybe 25. You don't move until I tell you. There's something else. Her voice dropped half a register. When we landed, I got a message from Daniel Reeves. He went very still. What did it say? He said, I'm sorry. The index was all they got. The copies are still clean. Check the verification codes. She paused. He gave me a 4-digit code that matches the verification system we established at the beginning, a code that only he and I know. Ilara, I know how it looks. He's been inside Vivian's network for 4 years. Vivian's people confirmed it directly. I know. Her voice was careful, controlled. But the code is legitimate, and if the copies are still clean, or it's a message designed to make you believe the copies are still clean, so you don't activate the redundancy. Silence on the line. What redundancy? She said quietly. The one you built that I don't know about. He kept his voice even. Because I know how you work, Ilara. You would not have built a single-layer document security architecture on infrastructure you couldn't fully verify. You built something underneath it. A longer silence. Yes, she said. Is it still intact? If the copies are compromised, the redundancy activates automatically when the primary verification fails. She paused. I built it so that even if I couldn't act, the system would act. When does the primary verification time out? 6 a.m. He looked at his watch. It was 12:47 a.m. 5 hours and 13 minutes. Then we have 5 hours to either confirm the copies are intact or let the redundancy activate, he said. And we need to get you and Nora out of that airfield before whoever is waiting at the perimeter decides that waiting is no longer the play. Marcus appeared at his shoulder. Contact confirmed. Vehicle en route to the field. 18 minutes. 18, Adrian told Ilara. Understood. I'm coming to you. A pause. You don't need to... I'm coming to you. He said it without drama. Just the flat, absolute certainty of a decision already made. 18 minutes. You moved to the maintenance exit, not before. He ended the call. He turned to Marcus. I need the car. I'll drive. No. He looked at Marcus's brother. The bruise along his jaw, the exhaustion in his posture, the wariness of someone who has been leveraged for 7 months and is not yet accustomed to being something else. Stay with him. Get him somewhere clean. Don't use anything connected to the organization's infrastructure. He paused. Do you have somewhere? Yes, Marcus said. Then go. Adrian, Marcus stopped him with his name. They know you're here. The laptop. They monitored the call. Vivian was talking to you from somewhere with real-time building surveillance. Yes? Which means they know you're heading for the airfield. Yes. So the vehicles at the perimeter aren't waiting for Alara. He paused. They're waiting for you. The warehouse was very quiet. Adrian thought about this for exactly the time it deserved, which was 4 seconds. Then I give them what they're waiting for, he said. That's Marcus. He turned. The clause activates in 72 hours. Every document Alara built, everything I found in that archive tonight, is worthless if we can't get the file to someone who can stop the activation. Right now, the only path to that outcome runs through that airfield. He picked up his coat from where he'd set it. If they want me at the airfield, then being at the airfield puts me in the same location as every piece of evidence we have, and it puts Vivian's people in a location where the only way they walk away with what they want is to go through both of us at once. That's an enormous risk. Everything tonight has been an enormous risk. He moved toward the corridor. That's what happens when you wait too long to look at the foundation. He left Marcus in the warehouse with his brother and walked back out through the corridor and through the door into the cold Port District night, and he got into the car and drove. The city thinned out as he moved south, the density of buildings dropping off, the street lighting becoming intermittent. He pushed the car to the edge of what the roads allowed, taking corners with the mechanical focus of someone who has separated the physical task from everything happening underneath it. His phone rang at 1:09 a.m. Not Alara. Not Marcus. Vivian Cross. He answered without taking his eyes off the road. You're going to the field, she said. You know I am. My people at the perimeter have instructions. Her voice was even. Not to stop you, to watch. He said nothing. I want the confrontation to happen in one place, she said. I want everyone in the same room with the same information. No more intermediaries. A pause. I'll be at the field when you arrive. He drove. Vivian. He kept his voice level. The redundancy in Alara's document security. The automatic activation at 6 a.m. You know about it. A pause that lasted 1 second too long. No, she said. Then Daniel Reeves doesn't know about it either. Another pause. Apparently not, she said. Which means that regardless of what happens at that field tonight, if we haven't resolved this before 6 a.m., the redundancy activates and everything goes public without anyone's control over the framing or the sequence. Silence on the line. I built this operation for 8 years, she said. I know. I wanted the consequence to be structured, deliberate. Her voice had something in it now that hadn't been there before. Not weakness. The sound of something carefully constructed encountering a variable it had not been built to accommodate. If it activates automatically, it goes everywhere at once, every channel, every oversight authority, every media contact in the index. He took a turn at speed, the road narrowing, without context, without the restitution framework, without anything that shapes what it means. He paused. Just the raw documentation and whatever story people build around it. The line was very quiet. How did she build a redundancy without Reeves knowing? Vivian said. It wasn't quite a question. Because she's your mother's daughter, Adrian said. He didn't know why he said it. It came out of somewhere that wasn't calculation. The silence on the line changed quality. What did you say? Vivian said. Your mother fought for 8 months to understand what happened to her family's assets. She didn't stop until the end. He kept driving. The airfield lights were visible now in the distance, a low cluster of light against the dark flat landscape. Ilara built her counter-operation the same way. She didn't stop when the infrastructure was compromised. She built the redundancy underneath it and kept going. He paused. They're the same quality in different people. You know that. The line was silent for a full 6 seconds. Pull up to the main terminal entrance, Vivian said. I'll be inside. She ended the call. Adrian drove the last half mile with the airfield lights coming up ahead of him and his hands steady on the wheel and the particular internal quiet of a man who has arrived, finally, at the place where everything that has been moving in separate directions is about to occupy the same room. The perimeter vehicles were there as described, 2 black SUVs, positioned at the outer boundary, engines running. He drove past them without slowing and they did not move. He pulled up to the terminal entrance. He cut the engine. He sat for one breath in the silence. Then he got out of the car and walked toward the terminal doors. The red file somewhere inside that building in Ilara's hands, Vivian Cross waiting beyond the doors, and 5 hours and 4 minutes remaining before a system built by his wife in secret activated itself and rendered every... The terminal building was small, a regional private aviation facility, the kind that served corporate charters and personal aircraft rather than commercial traffic, built for function over presentation. Fluorescent lighting, industrial carpet, a service desk along one wall, rows of waiting chairs that no one was sitting in. The space smelled of aviation fuel and the particular institutional cleaning product used in buildings that operated around the clock. Ilara was standing near the north exit when Adrian came through the main doors. She had the red file under her left arm, held against her body with the pressure of someone who has been carrying something for a long time and has stopped noticing the weight. She was still in the gray coat. Her hair had come loose on one side. She looked at him across the terminal and didn't move immediately, and in that half second before either of them did anything, Adrian registered the specific quality of her stillness. Not distance, not coldness, but the stillness of someone who has been running on controlled tension for 11 weeks and is, for the first time tonight, looking at someone she doesn't have to perform composure for. He crossed the terminal floor. He stopped in front of her. He looked at her face, the shadows under her eyes, the set of her jaw, the careful neutrality she'd been maintaining that was up close, more obviously effortful than it appeared from across the room. You drove past the perimeter vehicles, she said. They didn't move. Vivian told them not to. I know. He looked at the file under her arm. Are you actually all right? I've been better. A beat. I've been worse. He reached up and put his hand against the side of her face, and she let him, and for 3 seconds neither of them said anything. Her skin was cold from the building's air conditioning. He could feel the tension in her jaw under his palm, the grinding micropressure of someone who had been clenching their teeth for hours and was not aware of it. I should have trusted you from the beginning, he said. You did trust me. She moved her head slightly, not pulling away. You trusted me, and someone put a photograph of me in front of you and attached a deadline to it, and you made a decision in an elevator in 30 seconds that you'd spent 3 years building the context for. She looked at him steadily. That's not a failure of trust. That's a failure of information. I made you into collateral. And I let you, because I needed them to believe it worked. She lowered her eyes briefly. We both did things tonight that cost us something. We're going to have to live with the shape of that. She paused. Together. If you're still... Yes, he said. No hesitation. She looked at him again, and something in her face shifted. Not relief, because relief implied she'd been uncertain, and she hadn't been exactly uncertain. Something more specific than that. The expression of someone who had been holding a door closed from the outside and has now been told it's safe to put the weight down. Vivian's inside, she said. The back office. She came in through the service entrance 20 minutes ago. A pause. I saw her before you arrived. We didn't speak. But you saw her? Yes. What did you see? Ilara thought about this for a moment. A woman who's been carrying something too long, she said. The same thing I've been carrying, just a different shape. He took the file from her. She let him take it. Nora, he said. She's in the back with the ground crew. Safe. A pause. She's been through enough tonight. I'm not pulling her into whatever happens in the next hour. He nodded. They walked toward the back office together. Vivian Cross was sitting at the operations manager's desk when they came in. She had not appropriated the chair in any territorial way. She was sitting in it the way someone sat in a chair they had been offered, upright, with her hands folded on the desk in front of her and her folder beside them. She looked at Adrian first, then at Alara, and her expression registered something that was not quite surprise but was the close relative of it. The adjustment of a woman encountering a version of this meeting that was slightly different from the one she'd modeled. She had not expected them to walk in together. "Sit down," she said. Then she caught the register of her own voice and amended it. "Please." They sat. Adrian set the red file on the desk between them. Vivian looked at it. "That's the primary," she said. "Yes," Alara said, "and the copies." "Still in position, as of the last verification 30 minutes ago." Alara's voice was even. "If the verification fails before 6 a.m., the redundancy activates." "I know." Vivian looked at her. "Reeves told me about the primary verification system. He didn't know about the redundancy." She paused. "I should have expected that." "Yes," Alara said. "You should have." The two women looked at each other across the desk with the particular attention of people who have been operating in parallel for months and are now occupying the same physical space for the first time. Adrian watched it. He had seen adversarial negotiations before, had conducted hundreds of them, and what he was watching now was not quite adversarial. It was something more complicated. Two people who respected the quality of what the other had built, sitting on opposite sides of a desk that none of them fully controlled anymore. "The clause," Adrian said. "Walk me through the legal mechanism." "Exactly." Vivian turned to him. "The documentation of the public dispute was filed with the estate's administrative council at 11:15 p.m. Under the trust instrument, the council has a 72-hour review window. If no counter-documentation is filed within that window, the temporary transfer activates. Counter-documentation. A sworn affidavit affirming the validity of the marriage, supported by legal documentation." She paused. "Which would need to be filed by someone with standing." "My wife has standing," Adrian said. Vivian looked at Alara. "You'd need to move fast," she said. "We have 72 hours. "You have approximately 71 hours and 43 minutes. She held Alara's gaze. "And filing the counter-documentation stops the clause. It doesn't resolve anything else, the archive documentation, the financial records, the 5 families." She paused. "Those things don't go away because the clause doesn't activate." "I know," Adrian said. "What are you going to do about them?" The office was quiet. Through the wall came the faint ambient sound of the terminal, a PA announcement, the distant sound of equipment on the tarmac. Ordinary sounds. The sounds of a world continuing to operate around a room where nothing ordinary was happening. Adrian opened the red file. He turned to a specific section. Alara had organized it by subject, and he found the one he was looking for, the section she'd built from the financial transfer records, the partnership agreement, the correspondence file he'd found in the archive. He turned it around so it faced Vivian. She looked at it. She looked at it for a long time. Her face did not do the thing that faces did in performed emotional moments. It didn't crumple or harden or go through any of the conventional repertoire of visible feeling. What it did was much smaller and much more real. A single, almost imperceptible contraction around her eyes. The kind of involuntary muscular response that happened when something made contact with a nerve that had been exposed for a very long time. "You found the archive," she said. "Yes." "The full correspondence file?" "Yes." "Then you read the last message?" She looked up from the documents. "The one my mother sent?" "Yes," Adrian said. "I read it." Vivian looked at him. "What did it say to you?" He understood that this was the actual question, not what did the words say. She knew what the words said. She had probably memorized them decades ago. But what did they say to him, a man encountering his father's actions through his mother's final communication to the person who had taken everything? That she had already decided what she was going to do about it, he said. That she wasn't asking him to fix it or apologize. She was telling him what came next. He paused. She was telling him about you. The office held this in its particular silence. She died 14 months later, Vivian said. The land was gone. The investment that was supposed to fund the next 15 years of her work was gone. She fought the deterioration for as long as she could, and then she couldn't anymore. She looked at the file. I was 23. I had watched my mother spend 4 years trying to get someone to explain to her how a legal business transaction had left her with nothing, and I had watched the legal and financial system produce document after document that made everything look legitimate. She stopped. I understood then that the system was not going to help her, or me. The system had been used against us by someone who understood it better than we did. She looked at Adrian. I decided I was going to understand it better than anyone. 8 years, Alara said quietly. 8 years. Vivian looked at her. You found one thread in 11 weeks. I found all 5 in 8 years. She paused. You're better at this than I was when I started. I had more to work with. You were building the map from scratch. Something moved between them that was not quite acknowledgement and not quite respect, and was actually more valuable than either because it was honest. Adrian put his hand flat on the desk. I want to propose something, he said. Both women looked at him. The clause doesn't activate. Alara files the counter documentation tonight before we leave this building. He looked at Vivian. In exchange, I don't contest what you've built. The documentation goes to the appropriate oversight authorities. The full picture, all 5 operations, the complete financial record, the archive materials. He paused. I will not protect this organization from the consequences of what my father did. Vivian was very still. That's not all of it, she said. No. He opened the folder from the archive, the one he'd carried here from Elner Street, and set it beside the red file. The $420 million, the total extraction across 5 families. He looked at her directly. I will establish a legal restitution structure, not a foundation with my family's name on it. A structure administered independently with the 5 families represented in its governance. Whatever can be calculated as the compound value of what was taken. He paused. I don't have the ability to give back what the money actually cost those families. I understand that. But I can make the financial consequence real. Vivian looked at the 2 folders on the desk. She looked at them for a long time. Why? She said. He thought about the honest answer. Because I read your mother's last message, he said, and it was written to a man who was never going to respond to it. And I have spent tonight understanding that I inherited not just his assets, but his habit of treating other people's losses as abstractions that had nothing to do with me. He stopped. I'm done with that. The office was very quiet. Vivian looked at Alara. Did you know he was going to say this? No, Alara said, but I'm not surprised. Vivian looked back at Adrian. Her hands on the desk had not moved, but the quality of their stillness had changed. Not the stillness of someone holding a position, but the stillness of someone who has, for the first time in a very long time, arrived somewhere they weren't entirely prepared to be. The people at the perimeter, she said. The security team. I'll send them home. She reached into her coat and produced a phone, set it on the desk. I'll make the call in front of you. All right, Adrian said. She made the call. 4 sentences. She set the phone back down. Through the terminal wall, distantly, came the sound of 2 vehicles starting their engines, then moving, then the sound diminishing until the building's ambient hum reasserted itself as the only thing in the room. Daniel Reeves, Alara said. Vivian looked at her. How long was he actually inside your network? Alara said. 4 years. And before that, a pause. He ran a legitimate operation, financial architecture for high net worth clients. He approached me 7 years into my investigation. He had documentation I hadn't found yet. One of the 5 families had hired him to do their own forensic recovery, and he'd hit dead ends and thought I might have the pieces that would unlock his findings. She paused. I should have been more careful. He's careful, Alara said. He spent 6 years making me believe he was on my side. She looked at the desk. The verification code he sent tonight. You didn't know about it. No? Which means he sent it on his own. She paused. The copies are actually clean. Then he gave you something true, Vivian said carefully. He gave me something true at the end. I don't know why. Alara looked up. Maybe he ran the same calculation everyone runs at some point, about which side of a thing they're actually standing on when it matters. Vivian said nothing for a moment. What happens to him? She said. That depends on what the oversight authorities find and what they choose to pursue. Adrian closed the folders. I'm not going to go after him personally. That's not what tonight is about. And Marcus Hale. Also not what tonight is about. He looked at Vivian steadily. Marcus cooperated with your people because you had his brother. His brother is safe now. Marcus knows what he owes, and I think he'll spend a long time paying it back. A pause. That's between us. Vivian absorbed this. She looked at the two folders on the desk, then back at Adrian, and he watched something that had been present in her face all night. A particular tension around her mouth, a guardedness in her eyes that was older than the 8 years of the operation, that went all the way back to a 23-year-old watching her mother try to navigate a system designed to defeat her. He watched it change. Not disappear, not resolve into anything clean or complete, just change, the way long-maintained structural tension changes when the load it was built to bear is finally shifted. There's something you need to know, she said, about the operation. About why I called you directly tonight. Earlier, the call from the car. She paused. I've been building this for 8 years. Every element was designed to arrive at a specific outcome. The broadcast, the clause, the asset transfer. I had planned it down to the hour. She looked at the desk. And then I saw the photograph she left for you in the archive room. Adrian looked at her. The one on the back of the document photograph, Vivian said. The message she left so you'd come back to the building and find it. I had my people pull the archive room feed before you arrived. She stopped. She left 7 words that told you exactly where to look and exactly why it mattered. And I realized... She stopped again. Restarted. I realized that what she had built was something I hadn't modeled. She didn't build a case. She built a path for you to walk yourself, so that when you arrived at the truth, you'd arrived at it with your own feet. The office was very quiet. My mother tried to tell your father the truth directly, Vivian said, in 4 years of letters and calls and legal filings. She tried every version of direct confrontation, and none of it penetrated. She paused. Your wife understood that direct confrontation doesn't work on men who've built their entire identity around control. So she removed the control variable and built you a trail instead. She looked at Alara. I've spent 8 years angry at the method your mother used to build these operations. I built my own method around that anger. And your wife used a third method that I hadn't considered. A beat. That's why I called tonight, because I needed to see if it worked. Alara was quiet for a moment. Did it? She said. Vivian looked at Adrian. He looked back at her. Yes, he said. It worked. Vivian picked up her folder from the desk and stood. She looked at the red file. Keep the original, she said. I have copies. The oversight submission will come from my documentation. It's more comprehensive, and it's been organized for exactly this purpose for 4 years. She paused. I'll make the submission myself. I don't need you to do it. I know you don't, Adrian said. I want to be the one who makes it. For my mother. She held his gaze. And I want it on record that the submission came from me, not from a whistleblower, not from an anonymous source, from Vivian Cross, who spent 8 years finding what your father buried, because her mother deserved to have someone find it. It will be on record, he said. She nodded once. She walked to the office door. She stopped with her hand on the door frame and turned back. The restitution structure, she said. The 5 families. Some of them are going to be harder to find than others. The documentation is complete, but people move. People die and leave complicated inheritances. She paused. You're going to need someone who understands financial architecture to help build the administration. I know someone, Alara said. Vivian looked at her. She knows what it costs to track money through 20 years of legal architecture, Alara said. And she's been doing this long enough that the 5 families will trust the process. A pause. We'll talk, Vivian said. Not warm, but not closed. After the oversight process completes. She left. They listened to her footsteps cross the terminal floor. The main door opened and then settled back into its frame. Outside, in the cold of the airfield, the sound of a car engine starting. Not an SUV, something smaller. a vehicle that had been parked around the side of the building in a place none of them had thought to look. The sound diminished. The building was very quiet. Adrian and Alara sat in the operations office in the particular silence of people who have been in motion for so long that stillness has a slightly foreign texture. The red file sat on the desk between them. The fluorescent light above had a faint flicker at its cycle edge. Not disruptive, just present, the small imperfection of a functional world. Alara put both hands flat on the desk. Adrian looked at her hands. The left hand. The fourth finger. The absence of the ring she'd removed 2 days ago and left in the bedside drawer of their apartment. She followed his gaze. "It's still there," she said. "The ring. I didn't—" She stopped. "I need you to know I didn't take it off because I decided anything. I took it off because I couldn't wear it in that room and have it mean something false." "I know," he said. "I want it back on." She looked at him directly. "I want to go home and I want to file the counter documentation and I want to put it back on." A pause. "But I also need you to understand what tonight cost me. Not to punish you with it. Just—" She stopped. "I need you to carry that knowledge. Because if you don't carry it, the next time something comes at us, you're going to make the same calculation in the same elevator, and you're going to choose silence again because you think protection means shielding me from consequences instead of trusting me to face them with you." He held her gaze without flinching. "I understand," he said. "Tell me what you understand." "That you are not someone who needs to be protected from the truth." He paused. "That protecting you, the way I understood protection, was a form of control dressed as care. That I turned you into a variable to be managed instead of a person to be trusted." He stopped. "And that you built the entire counter operation without me because at some level you'd understood, before any of this started, that I would make exactly the choice I made." Her eyes didn't waver. "I hoped you wouldn't," she said. "I built the counter operation in case you did. Which is worse or better, depending on how you look at it." "It's just true," she said. "It's just exactly what's true." He reached across the desk and covered her left hand with his right. She turned her hand over and held his. They stayed like that for a moment. Not a resolution, not a scene of closure, just two people sitting in a lit room at 2 a.m. after a night that had extracted things from both of them that neither of them was entirely sure how to replace, holding on to each other in the way that people held on when they were still deciding whether the structure was intact enough to stand on. Nora appeared in the office doorway. She looked at them, looked at the desk, looked at the red file. "Is it done?" she said. "The hard part," Alara said. "Yes." Nora exhaled. It was the exhale of someone who had been holding their diaphragm in an unnatural position for several hours. She leaned against the doorframe. "I'm going to need about 4 hours of sleep before I can be useful to anyone." "You've been useful enough tonight," Alara said. "I'm also going to need to know that the document copies are actually clean before I close my eyes." She looked at Alara. "The Reeves message." "I believe the copies are clean," Alara said. "We'll verify at 6 a.m. when the redundancy window closes. And until then we file the counter documentation and we get some sleep, and we let the system do what it's going to do." She paused. "The oversight submission is going to take time regardless. Weeks, probably. The legal process around the clause will take longer. None of this resolves tonight." "But tonight it stops getting worse," Nora said. "Tonight it stops getting worse." Nora pushed off the doorframe. "Then I'm going to find somewhere in this building with a couch." She looked at Adrian. "She needs to eat something, and she won't think to tell you that." She left. Adrian looked at Alara. "She's not wrong," Alara said. They found the terminal's small operations kitchen. Adrian made coffee with the machine on the counter, institutional, the kind that produced coffee that was functional rather than good, and found a box of wrapped crackers in the cabinet and a jar of peanut butter that had been opened and resealed. He set them on the counter without ceremony. Alara ate crackers standing up, leaning against the counter with the gray coat finally off, draped over a chair. She looked, with the coat off, slightly smaller than she had all night, and slightly more real. She touched her stomach. "She's been quiet for a while." "Is that normal?" "She moves more during the day. She's probably sleeping." A pause. "She's been through enough tonight, too." He handed her the coffee. She wrapped both hands around it and looked at him over the rim. The restitution structure. What you told Vivian. She paused. You meant it. Yes. It's going to be complicated, the oversight process, the legal exposure, the board. The board is going to do what the situation requires, or they're going to find themselves on the wrong side of a very detailed public record. He leaned against the counter opposite her. I spent tonight reading about what my father did. I can spend the next few years doing what he didn't. She was quiet for a moment. The empire, she said. What's left of it after this? Some of it. The parts that are actually clean. He paused. Smaller, reconfigured. He looked at her. I was never going to be my father anyway. I just didn't know how much that was true until tonight. She drank her coffee. I want to go home, she said. The counter documentation. We can file it from home. She set the cup down. I want to go home and I want to change my clothes and I want to sit somewhere that isn't a warehouse or an archive or an airport terminal. She paused. And then I want to sleep. And tomorrow I want to start the part where we actually do what we said we'd do instead of the part where we survive the night. All right, he said. They left at 3:14 a.m. Nora stayed at the airfield, asleep on a couch in the pilot's lounge that turned out to be more comfortable than anything the operations area had offered. Adrian drove. Elara sat in the passenger seat with the red file on her lap and the gray coat back on, and her head leaned against the window glass, not sleeping, but not quite awake either. In the particular in-between state of someone whose body has finally begun negotiating with the hours it's been denied. He drove through the dark, the road unspooling ahead of them in the headlight's reach. Somewhere south of the city's outer boundary, she said, without lifting her head from the glass. What did the last message say? He didn't ask which message. He knew. Your mother's last message, he said. To my father. Yes. It said she was going to stop trying to explain what he'd done, that explanations required the other person to be willing to understand, and that she was going to stop waiting for that willingness. He paused. And she said her daughter would know what his name meant. He paused again. And that someday he would know her daughter's name. Elara was quiet. He never knew her name, she said. He died before the operation became anything. No, Adrian said, but I know it now. She lifted her head from the window glass and looked at him. He kept his eyes on the road. And the people who share those 5 families' stories will know it, he said. And whatever process comes out of the next several months will have it on record. He paused. Your mother wanted to be known. Vivian spent 8 years making sure she would be. That's not nothing. She was quiet for a long time. No, she said finally. It's not nothing. The city came back around them as they drove north. The buildings gaining density, the streetlights returning, the first thin traces of pre-dawn beginning at the horizon's edge. Not light yet, just the lessening of dark, the incremental retreat of night that happened whether or not anything had resolved by morning. They got home at 4:07. The apartment was exactly as they'd left it. That always surprised Adrian after nights like this. How the interior of ordinary life held its position regardless of what happened outside it. The same furniture. The lamp on the end table they'd bought at a street market 14 months ago. The books on the shelf that Elara had arranged by color on one side and by subject on the other because she'd never been able to decide which organizational principle she preferred and had compromised by using both. She went to the bedroom. He heard the drawer of the bedside table open, then close. She came back into the main room and held out her left hand. The ring was back on. She looked at it for a moment, the way someone looked at something they'd been afraid they might not see again, and then she looked at him, and he crossed the room and held both her hands in his and looked at it too. I'm going to do everything wrong sometimes, she said. I know. And so will you. I know that too. I just need us to do it toward each other instead of around each other. Her voice was quiet, not fragile. The quietness of something that had been through a great deal of pressure and was still standing. That's all I'm asking. Yes, he said. He meant it in every part of him that was capable of meaning things. She went to sleep at 4:43, still in her clothes, curled on her side with one hand resting on the place where their daughter was. He watched her for a moment and then went to the desk in the second room and opened his laptop and began drafting the counter documentation, working through the standard legal language with the patience of someone who understood that the next several months were going to require this. The slow, deliberate work of building something real in place of what had collapsed, one documented truth at a time. He filed it at 6:04 a.m., 1 minute before Alara's redundancy window closed. At 6:05, his phone showed a single notification from an automated verification system. The primary verification had been confirmed. The copies were clean. The redundancy stood down. He set the phone on the desk. Through the apartment window, the city was turning gray-blue with early light, the specific color of morning before it committed to being morning, that honest and provisional hour when the previous day had definitively ended and the new one hadn't yet announced what it intended to be. He got up from the desk and went back to the doorway of the bedroom. She was still asleep. He leaned against the door frame and looked at her in the early light and let himself feel, for the first time in hours, the full weight of what the night had been. Not cataloging it, not analyzing it, just holding it the way you held something that was both very heavy and very necessary to carry. Their daughter moved once, a small visible shift in Alara's side. He saw it. He stood in the doorway until the light changed. Then he went to the kitchen and started making breakfast, because she would wake up in an hour and she would need to eat, and the next several months were going to require both of them to be standing. And the first thing after a night like this was always the smallest ordinary thing, done with intention, done with your full attention given over to it. He cracked eggs against the pan. Outside, the city continued its mourning. The counter documentation was on file. The red file was on the desk. And somewhere across the city, in an office or a hotel room or the back seat of a car, Vivian Cross was drafting an oversight submission 8 years in the making, with her mother's name in the first paragraph where it had always belonged. The eggs cooked. The light changed. The city moved into its day.